truth is, 0 pipelines have been proposed or built under these Liberals, and they've killed billions in projects and hundreds of thousands of jobs. The PM ignored experts, workers, Indigenous leaders, investors in every province and territory on Bill C-69. The court said it's a, quote, profound invasion, a chokehold on provinces, a wrecking ball that smacks of paternalism and overrides Indigenous agreements. It's uncertain, unpredictable, unquantifiable, and unreliable, just like Conservatives warned. So, instead of wasting more time and tax dollars to appeal, will he just repeal Bill C-69?
The Impact Assessment Act, or what the Premier likes to call the No More Pipeline Law, is headed to Canada's highest court.
Nobody in the legal community woke up very shocked.
The bill would see the federal government consider climate change when approving new resource projects. In May, Alberta's Court of Appeal found the act to be unconstitutional. Now the feds have asked the Supreme Court to make a ruling.
When that does happen, that will be the final word, and we will see at that point whether or not the legislation is able to survive in its current form, or if it requires some alterations in order to fit with the constitutional ruling of the court.
9 out of 10 provinces and all 3 territories demanded major changes to this legislation, changes the Senate proposed and the Liberals are rejecting today. And the Liberals have given a single minister the ability to determine what projects require federal review without any prior notice through regulation, meaning any future project in provincial jurisdiction could require a lengthy, expensive federal review at the last minute without warning. That will not create certainty for investors, and it will kill jobs in Canada. The Liberals are taking projects away from expert life cycle regulators with a depth and breadth of experience and knowledge and putting them under a new federal regulator without the same level of expertise, while expanding opportunities for political and ideological interference. And what's really galling, and you heard it again here today, is that the Liberals have justified this legislation while they deliberately undermine and attack Canada's reputation with ongoing and coordinated, consistent attacks on confidence in Canada's formerly world-renowned regulator, on Canada's world-leading track record of independent science and evidence-based environmental reviews, and on Canada's leadership in Indigenous consultation and the incorporation of traditional knowledge, for which Canada has long been renowned for decades. But it's a pattern, because these Liberals constantly divide Canadians, pitting regions and provinces against each other for Liberal partisan purposes at any and all costs, while they say one thing and do another. But this time, the Liberals' cynical tactics have backfired, because Canadians don't always agree on everything, and thank goodness for that. But people across Canada are united in their opposition to this disastrous bill. Let me remind the Prime Minister again, it's not only those 6 premiers who have opposed Bill C-69 in recent months. The only government that didn't speak out is an anti-energy, anti-resource, NDP Green coalition government that isn't even representing the majority view of its citizens when it comes to pipelines and oil and gas. And the provinces have been very clear about the economic consequences of the Liberals' Bill C-69. The government of Saskatchewan says, quote, the uncertainty and the non-transparency that Bill C-69 would introduce is disastrous. The government of Quebec says, quote, Bill C-69 gives the federal government substantial powers, the equivalent of a veto, over Quebec's economic development and the management of its natural resources. The government of Newfoundland and Labrador says Bill C-69 is a, quote, unnecessary regulatory burden, potentially undermining development opportunities and the global competitiveness of the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador offshore area. The government of Nunavut says Bill C-69 may, quote, muddy or lengthen the processes, potentially leading to a reduction in investor confidence in Canada and Nunavut. The government of Nova Scotia says the new assessment criteria in Bill C-69, quote, raise significant uncertainty and there is risk that they may not be interpreted similarly in different offices across the country. The government of Ontario says Bill C-69 is, quote, fundamentally contradictory to several of Canada's long-term strategic goals and, quote, effectively hinders natural resource-related economic development within the country. The government of New Brunswick says Bill C-69, quote, represents an unacceptable risk and an unacceptable impediment to Atlantic Canada's and New Brunswick's future prosperity. The government of Manitoba says Bill C-69 will, quote, drive down investment, compound economic losses, and sacrifice jobs. And the government of Alberta called Bill C-69, quote, completely unacceptable, and has announced it will launch a constitutional challenge against it. The premiers are speaking out because they must represent their provinces, and they're simply voicing the rising alienation, frustration, anger, anxiety, and experiences of the people that they represent. And they are making the plea to protect their jurisdiction with good reason, because one of the amendments from the Senate that the Liberals are rejecting was the implementation of an exemption list to ensure that projects under provincial jurisdiction would not be exposed to federal review. That is an amendment that the Liberals are rejecting.